So console exclusive, we talked about this on other streams before, Horky. I know this is something you bring up a lot about, sort of like the walled garden, the idea that you have to purchase a console to play it. And we've seen this in video games ever since I can remember, on the NES, Sega, Super Nintendo, and up to now. So we're here to talk about, is that a good thing or a bad thing for the consumer? What do you think?
Well, I mean, you already know my stance. It's a little bit of a mixed bag, though. I mean, I generally in favor of going against the idea of a walled garden, going against the idea of exclusivity. I think the benefits of more of a free console market or a free games market outweigh the drawbacks pretty heavily.
Yeah, I was trying to think about whether there were any arguments for it. I mean, if it was in a place, like if we just tried to imagine a place where there were no walled gardens, because right now, if you want to play Zelda, Uncharted, and say Ori and the Will of the Wisps, you are going to have to potentially buy 3 different consoles. So it's going to cost. So right now, it's costing the consumer more. And I think a really bad argument people seem to make is a very childish one of where they kind of get tribal with their console. You see them arguing on silly forums like, "Oh, PlayStation's better. It has this many exclusive. Haha, Xbox has nothing." But when you do that, all you're doing is you're actually celebrating your inability to play a game that's on another console that you don't have.
Sure.
So I was trying to think. This is all I could come up with for what would make what would be a good argument for it. Now, 2 reasons. I think it can contribute to some games being better. Now, if you're making an exclusive to make your console desirable, I think you're going to see more resources being put into it. Breath of the Wild is going to have a very long development time because they need that to be perfect. They need Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey to be total perfect games that can stay at full price on the Nintendo Switch and make that console worth buying for, say, 5 whole years. And you might see Sony do the same thing with Naughty Dog's games. Kind of the opposite argument, though, is for some reason Bloodborne tended to run pretty poorly on the PlayStation 4, the vanilla, when it runs better on the Pro. And that was a very early exclusive. So, and you're going to see these games being remastered throughout the year. So you're going to see Shadow of the Colossus brought forward. There's already been 2 remakes of that game. So I think in that sense, you're possibly getting some pretty high quality games.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also another little bit to that. I actually thought about this a little bit yesterday, and the one argument I could probably have in favor of exclusivity or the idea of a walled garden is that if your game tailor-made for one specific console, if it's taking advantage of every single little intricacy that that console provides that the other does not, then perhaps you get a better product in the end. Maybe something more interesting or innovative. There's a lot of possibilities there in which way it could go. It's just, I know if you have to go cross-platform, you either have to have like a higher layer of abstraction that sits on top so that you can develop a common. So, all of the games you make as a game developer can be sort of, without much trouble, deployed on any of those platforms. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have to do that, if you're just targeting a single platform, then you don't have to make those little compromises anymore. Yeah. Or at least perhaps you don't, unless you're forward-thinking and thinking, well, maybe we're going to push this out to another platform.
Yeah, absolutely. The PS3 was criticized by some for having a sort of unique architecture that could possibly give it more power. And what we saw was that the cross-platform games all performed better on the 360, which was very similar to developing on a PC. So games that had to be on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation, the PlayStation was going to get the worst version. But when you had The Last of Us or the Uncharted games, Naughty Dog, who has worked with PlayStation ever since the PlayStation 1 and was known for, even back in the Crash Bandicoot days and before that, for basically being pretty rogue programmers and making miracles happen, where there's an interesting interview where they're talking to some of the Naughty Dog founders about how when they were starting out making games, they used to have to crash a system so that it would output whatever code they'd put into it, and then they would take that code basically line by line, crashing it over and over again. And when they had to, hire other people to help them make like Crash Bandicoot and beyond, they were struck by kind of this, almost like a boomer making fun of a millennial, like, oh my God, you guys don't even know how to do this, and showing them the sort of wizardry. And I think that you were able to see that, okay, you might have the worst version of Skyrim on a PlayStation 3, but The Last of Us, Uncharted, basically those ones were sort of these really crowning achievements. But
yeah, and I mean, it's a shame not to get to play them on other systems, though. To force yourself to have to pay some $multi-hundred buy-in price in order to be able to access that.
Absolutely, and I think that this becomes mostly definitely highlighted if you're going to buy one platform and you decide to buy a PC. So PC is going to be more expensive, but it's the most powerful, and it would probably be the most convenient if you could play every game on one platform if you were a PC owner, because you probably feel like you've put in the most investment. And if you're somebody who say you love the From Software games, you're playing Bloodborne on a vanilla PS4 Pro and it's not running great, it's dipping below 30 frames, but you're able to play Dark Souls 2 and 3 on a PC and they're running at like 144 frames a second and you're playing at 4K. So I can definitely see where that frustration would come in, where you feel like you're being forced to play the worst version just because it's on and you're also paying a fee to play the worst version.
Yeah, I mean, and you said that PC being more expensive. I mean, it's all relative, though, because it depends on how much investment you're actually willing to put into that.
True.
If you go for the top-end components at the time of release, then yeah, it's going to be, over $1,000 pretty easily. But if you go for just like some kind of middle-of-the-road components, you may be able to work out a price that's similar to what you pay for a console.
Yeah, and could last for quite a long time. And then I'm sure, yeah, as I was saying that, I was thinking, I'm sure like if you kind of average it out with the upgrades, maybe it could be totally comparable from buying a console on day one.
Yeah, it really depends, like, because sometimes you're going to have like graphics cards like the new NVIDIA 3080 and 3090. If you end up getting the 3090, you're probably going to have to get the highest end Intel processor in order to actually eke out all of the performance that you're going to get out of the graphics card. You can leave some on the table and go with a smaller or less powerful processor, and that's perfectly fine because you probably won't see so much of the difference. But it's a very over time kind of thing. It's very progressive. You get stuff and swap it out eventually. Sometimes that can be a little more expensive than others. Like, for instance, if you have to swap out your motherboard and CPU, that's going to be a lot more than if you were just swapping out maybe just the graphics card.
Yeah, I was thinking of some other games that might have benefited from being an exclusive. Something like Street Fighter V. Capcom had said that they were considering not even making it because they just weren't seeing the potential of enough profit coming through, even though Street Fighter 4 seemed to be fairly successful. But Sony had stepped in and it released on PlayStation and PC and not on Xbox. A game like Cuphead received a bunch of help and funding from Microsoft, and that was an incredibly ambitious game where I read stories that the developers were even taking like a second mortgage out on their house. So even with that help, maybe it would have been totally impossible to have a game that detailed. So that's another area with it. And then there's Shenmue 3, which I guess is a totally bad argument on that side.
But then you have other games that are extremely successful being deployed on multi-platform, like Hollow Knight or Celeste or Stardew Valley.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so then you would look at, okay, if you're available on more platforms, obviously you're going to sell more. So are you going to sell more being available on more platforms? Then that will make up for, say, the lack of that initial day one or whatever, like the sort of the pre-release boost you would get from a publisher.
So the question is, I mean, how different should it have to be to develop for different platforms? Why can't they be just essentially like PCs to where that argument just becomes completely, meaningless?
Absolutely, and that comes from, so if you're making exclusives to make your console desirable, which I would argue is pretty effective. I was looking at the top-selling consoles of all time, and all of the PlayStations and almost all of the Nintendo consoles other than the Wii U are ahead of the best-selling Microsoft console, which is the 360. And I'd say the 360 probably had the most true exclusives. It had the little indie live arcade thing, compared to the PlayStation at the time, and the Xbox One is lagging way behind. So I think if we imagine a world where there were no exclusives, let's say they had made like a monopoly rule or something, and they go, you cannot have exclusives on your platforms. I think that could actually make the consoles be even better, because now the PlayStation and the Xbox are saying, if you want to, how are you going to lure people in? You have to make an even better console that makes the games look even better, that the controller needs to be better. You have to come up with these other selling points that now become a top priority.
And that also drives the hardware too. Like the whole point is that like the exclusivity is what enables even having those like weird features, which, you know, it's kind of a mixed bag with that too, because yeah, you could come up, what if you had something like the Switch? Like you can't, PlayStation's not going to have Joy-Cons, you know?
Right.
I mean, they certainly could, but it's weird to think that you basically have to have some kind of alternative control, and that, you know, in some cases, in some devices, that just might simply not be possible. So at some level, it could drive down innovation. Like you do have to worry about that. But at the same time, if that's the only expense, and it comes with the benefit of having, you know, more accessibility, then it's complicated, right? It's, you know, you gotta decide which is worse, which is better, or maybe there's some kind of middle ground there.
Yeah, and I think that games where the exclusive war was very prevalent in, say, the Genesis, Super Nintendo era, really, really apparent in, say, N64 versus PlayStation, because they were totally different tech, like before. But once you hit sort of the PS3X 360 time, multi-platform became pretty huge, and I think Sony kind of tried to bring back more exclusives with the PS4, and so we're seeing that get watered down, but you're still seeing sort of this like a disparity in sales between the PS4 and the Xbox. I don't think you can pin it definitely on exclusives, although Sony does try to hammer that. But yeah, it's I think it's really hard to argue that for the consumer, for the gamer, the player, that there's any real drawback to having exclusives. And I guess it just kind of comes down to it being, this is a capitalist thing, and they're free to make what they're going to make and what they're going to offer. And it's just something I guess we have to live with. Is there any way we can get around that? I mean, if people band together and just started not buying exclusives?
Well, you already saw like the situation with Sony's like corporate meeting or whatever they had, their presentation,
right,
from, I guess, what was it, back in July or August or whatever. They basically said that we're looking to bring PC, some of our Sony exclusive IPs to PC, which, I mean, they've already started doing that with Horizon Zero Dawn. What else you got? I guess technically you've got the Death Stranding. I don't know if there's any others that were confirmed yet, but
the Yakuza games have been on PC?
Yeah, Death Stranding is on PC. Horizon Zero Dawn is on PC already. Those two are kind of marketed as Sony exclusives, right? But, you know, they're not going to bring out the new Horizon Zero Dawn yet. That has yet to be announced as a PC, or as being available on PC as well.
Yeah, so...
But then you get to that situation that we had with the Sony event, where they had, you know, also available on PC for two of their bigger titles, Final Fantasy and... what was the other one?
The one where you're on that planet and you play as the older lady?
No, Demon Souls. It was just Demon Souls.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, two extremely big titles that they had at the bottom there very clearly, and they were in different kind of formats. It was like also available on PC, and then something available on PC as well as PS5 and whatever. And then, you know, they backpedal after that and they say, "Oh no, it's also going to be, it's not going to be available on PC." It's like, I mean, internally, it seems like they're wanting that. But, I mean, obviously, they don't want to immediately say, look, these are the reasons why you don't have to buy our new console.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that I think those are two big points that, well, one that had accidentally slipped out and one that was mentioned to anyone that is going to look at the those kind of more deeper industry notes, that Sony is looking to start branching those things out. So even Sony, who I guess is right up there with Nintendo as the top tiers of the top Naughty Dogs of having exclusives, they're starting to branch out. And I think Nintendo, they'll probably be the holdovers, because their whole thing is
they're a separate market.
Yeah, it's a separate market, and I mean, I'm sure it would be no problem to run any Switch game on a PC and have it look even better. But I do really appreciate that when Nintendo develops on kind of the limited palette of their hardware, it does seem to create something that is uniquely their own and is really beautiful on its own. I mean, I often say how much, when I look at Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Splatoon, they're right up there with the most beautiful video games I've ever seen. And when I can look at a game that has unbelievable grass physics or something, it's artistically not always as impactful. So, like, say we looked forward and Sony's already looking to branch out. Nintendo probably is going to keep with what they're doing, trying to hold. They're going to keep those games close to their chest because what they can offer.
They've got the portable market in their palms.
Absolutely, yeah. So it would be. So I guess their two-pronged attack is we'll give you all the games we can possibly fit on a portable, like Doom, up to Doom and Rocket League and a bad version of The Witcher 3. And then for games, and then we're also going to have these exclusives. And that's going to be their strategy. And I think they're just going to keep probably moving further away in that regard.
What's the earliest timed exclusive you can think of? Because when I think of timed exclusives, it's weird to me because like sometimes I feel a little disconnected from consoles. I mean, I had, a PS4. I enjoyed that. But thinking about it, the thing I most connect to with timed release right now is Epic Game Store and eventually access being made elsewhere like Steam. And I just wondered, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if Sony is watching some of this, seeing what Epic is doing, and seeing this idea of timed exclusivity and whatnot, and thinking, maybe we'll have a timed exclusivity release on the PC as well.
Yeah, it's funny as consoles, well, at least the big two in consoles, Sony and Microsoft, have been maybe moving away from exclusivity and using that timed exclusives. You see that all of a sudden when Epic enters the market and they're trying to fight for that, they're trying to use those console tactics of exclusivity. And I guess when I think of timed exclusives, I always think of what Xbox was doing. Probably Xbox One and in the 360, where they would have Mass Effect for a while and then it would end up on the PS3. Or I'm not sure about this, but I'm assuming that Resident Evil 4 was probably on the PS2 first and then ended up on the GameCube. But I think that corporate-wise, they're probably looking at this in pure profitability of timed exclusive means that we can have maybe a stronger launch. If you can only play these games when the PS5 launches on the PS5 for at least a couple months, the people that are not going to wait for a price decrease, who have the money that want to play that game day one, they're going to buy a PS5. They might even buy an Xbox 2 or whatever they're going to call it, the Series X. But you can get their money and then still have the timed exclusivity window where for the people that are not your sort of like your second tier consumers, you're still going to get the money from them too. So it does seem like the way that they are moving forward, and I guess that's at least one step in the right direction for it being slightly better for the consumer.
Yeah, got to please the shareholders first, and yeah, I don't have any numbers in front of me, but I am sure the data shows like when it comes to the majority of console sales and like the amount of money they make for a new console, I would assume there's just like a huge spike immediately upon launch, and then like a steady kind of steady trend after that, perhaps.
Yeah, I've read some figures about that where for games they make 90% of their money in the first, say, 3 weeks of when a game comes out, and that's why you see these drastic sales with that Steam started of just 82% off and that kind of thing, because you're trying to lure in the people who are only going to spend $20 on a game. Like for me, and I knew that the new God of War was not going to be my cup of tea, but when I see it for $20, it's definitely worth more than $20.
So what do you think about like later on, like 2 years down the line? Do you think they're going to be like? Do you think they'll give up on making things as tight when it comes to exclusivity? Maybe shorten it to like, oh, you'll be able to get this on PC in 6 months, or maybe include the announcements, then say also available on PC without having to hold back so much due to the launch.
I think they're probably testing it right now with this launch window. I think the consoles are kind of, ever since we've seen the Pro models, this current gen, that we're going to a different era of consoles, and they're going to see what works, and they're going to crunch their numbers down. And yeah, I think that it'll end up kind of being like movie theaters, if you can remember those, where they come on the movie theaters for 3 months and then they go to the next tier down of sort of on demand, and then it goes to the the different streaming platforms or whatever. So I think it'll probably end up being a lot more like that, because once you give a taste of that kind of success, if they realize that, we're making a lot more money by having a Bloodborne type game on the PlayStation first, and then 3 months later you release it and it's this big event, and we're still getting, if they're not losing that initial profit on, say, that first 2 or 3 weeks that the game comes out in day one and beyond, and then they're able to get this second wave, I don't think they'll ever be able to give that up. I think it'll be too tantalizing. If it makes more money, that's going to happen.
All about the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Like if McDonald's made more money selling healthy food, there would be a kale salad Happy Meal tomorrow.
Kale nuggets.
All right. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up, or did you have any thoughts on what do you see in the future?
I mean, I think that's got it pretty well covered.
Cool, man. Well, thank you for always bringing this up. It's one of those ideas that at first I thought, I guess the old gamer in me, who used to argue with my friends about the Sega Genesis being better and the PlayStation as a silly kid, it was one of those things that I kind of had to unlearn. And when you really unpack it and look at it, you realize, no,
it's instinctual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and there is no benefit for us. And I mean, it was fun to come up with some arguments why it could be better, and perhaps, but no, I mean, really, other than like some fun examples, I think that it's better for all of us down the road. All right, that's it. See you later, man.
See you.